It's very nice to see you all here and to see people are still coming in. This is a lecture of a series organized by the Leo Baeck Institute and the Israeli Oral History Association, as well as the Oral History Division at Hebrew University. My name is Daniel Mahler, and I'm a historian at the University of Haifa. And tonight I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce our speaker for tonight, Berit Zimmerling. She is a doctoral candidate in cultural anthropology at the University of Tübingen, where she completed her MA and now does a PhD as a part of a larger international research project on the transition from what is often called the era of witness to new forms of digital remembrance. So she's working on a very important shift in Holocaust memory from living testimony to new media formats. In her research, she combines digital anthropology and memory studies, and she focuses especially on the role of emotions, looking at how engagement with Holocaust memory is shaped through different media and technologies. She also published on guest books in memorial sites where she showed how even simple forms of communication can carry and shape emotional responses. And her current work develops these questions further in the context of digital media and survivor testimonies. As many of you know, just a few days ago here in Israel, we marked Holocaust Remembrance Day. It's a moment that I think highlights both the continued importance of this history and the challenges we face in keeping it meaningful, especially as the generation of survivors is gradually passing. And in this sense, the question of how memory is transmitted and experienced today becomes even more urgent, and at the same time raises questions about how people relate to these testimonies and how these encounters might be changing. So I'm very happy that we can have the talk by Berit here. She will speak for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for questions and discussion. Feel free to post also questions if you have during the talk already, so we can come back, take them up later. In the chat, you have the chat button down below on your screen. And with that, Berit, thank you very much for being with us tonight, and the floor is all yours.
Yes, thank you. Just going to share. Okay. Okay, you can all see the screen? Okay, I see nodding. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, so, wait, I will just, yeah. Thank you for the kind introduction and for inviting me to your program. And also thanks to everyone for joining to my presentation. I will give insights into my ongoing and hopefully soon to be finished PhD project. And I will talk about virtual witnessing, emotional remembrance through interactions with AI-based virtual representations of Holocaust survivors. As Danielle already mentioned, my PhD is part of the larger third-party funded project From the Era of the Witness to Digital Remembrance. It's a cooperation between the University of Tübingen at the Institute of Cultural Anthropology, where I am based, and the Ben Gurion University in Israel, Roni being one of my dear colleagues there, and the one who has invited me to share my research here today. So particular thanks go to Roni. And the focus of my research is actually quite literally in line with our project title, because in my PhD project, I am studying this shift from the era of the witness, which currently preoccupies the field of Holocaust remembrance on the basis of the Shoah Foundation's Dimensions in Testimony project. This now imminent end of this era raises questions about the future of remembrance without eyewitnesses. How can or should the field of Holocaust remembrance respond to the absence of eyewitnesses in the future? Dimensions in Testimony was developed to offer one possible answer to these questions and explores forms of digital remembrance through interactive virtual testimonies. In my project, I am researching interactions with these testimonies, and I will talk about what that is in just a moment. But before that, I'd like to start with the frame of my research. In an interview, one of the project's employees told me at the core of the product is the human connection. Based on conversations with Holocaust survivors, the Dimensions in Testimony project attempts to stabilize the loss of witnesses and the associated loss of central memory practices. In conversations with real, as in living, witnesses, survivors share their personal experiences with, for example, school classes or at memorial sites, illustrating the sometimes abstract historical analyses and educational formats with personal accounts. Looking at such encounters with the theory of doing emotions by cultural anthropologist Monique Scheer, we can understand these conversations as emotional practices of remembrance. In her theory, Scheer draws on a praxeological understanding of emotions and regards emotions as practices themselves, while at the same time always being intertwined with other practices. In other words, the connection between inner experience and outer expression of emotions grant us access to studying them. Underlying the processes of social negotiation, emotional practices are means of communication and thus are learned, produced, and perceived within a certain cultural logic. This perspective allows us to understand and research emotional experiences and their verbal or bodily expression in relation to the contexts in which they are experienced. Looking at the example of witness talks, survivors tell their experiences of what it meant on a day-to-day level for families, friendships, careers, life goals, and much more to be discriminated and persecuted and mobilize emotions in the audience. The audience's attentive listening, asking questions, and sharing of experiences from their own lives can be understood as emotional practices of remembrance. Witnesses relate the comments and questions to their biographies, moral messages, or current events in their answers. Through such conversational practices, and more specifically practices of witnessing, the meaning of history is constantly updated and renegotiated in each of these small interactions. The mutual exchange is therefore crucial for establishing certain relationships between the past and the present. So in order to preserve such emotional practices of remembrance and thus the human connection, Dimensions in Testimony employs AI-based technologies and high-quality video cameras to enable question-answer interactions with virtual images of witnesses. However, the introduction of an AI system inevitably shifts interactions and conversational practices and creates a product, a new technology, and educational tool, which is transforming established memory practices. Even though I assume some of you already are familiar with this project, sorry for the repetition, I'd like to give a brief demonstration of what virtual testimonies from Holocaust survivors are and how people can interact with them in a short video, and afterwards I will go a bit more into detail about what this means in technical terms. So I'm gonna...
Hi, how are you? Fine, thank you.
What's your story?
My name is Edith Maneker, and I was on the kinder transport. I was the youngest in my family. I had a sister that was 7 years older than me, and my sister went to England 2 weeks before I did, and then I went to England also on the kinder transport. I lived in England for 8 years, and I had 10 different moves all over the country, mostly being evacuated away from London because of the bombing there. I stayed in England until 1947, and then my sister and I and a little cousin went to America.
What do you think about Dimensions in Testimony?
I'm amazed and in awe of what you're planning to do, though of course I don't know completely what you're doing, but just hearing about it, I'm in awe of what you're doing.
What's your favorite food?
I don't think I have any favorite food because I think sometimes it depends on who cooked it.
Yeah, okay. So now you have a basic idea of what I mean when I talk about AI-based virtual testimonies. As you saw, I included very different questions, so you can ask the testimony questions about a range of topics, about their biography or experiences, about their personality, or about their opinions or perspectives. And as you saw as well, their answers vary in length. Some replies are only a few seconds, others are about a minute, and some are even longer than that. Oops. Oh. So, to give you an idea of how the testimonies work, I will give some information on the technological background. In an extensive interview process of about 5 days, survivors are asked about 1,000 questions in a sort of film studio. You can see something of an example of these studios in the photo. And during this interview process, the survivors' answers are being recorded by latest camera technology, which enables their display in lifelike high quality. The project emphasizes that the answers are not generated and not edited, so every answer is played in full length and exactly as the survivors said them. To enable interaction with the virtual representations, the project employs automated speech recognition and natural language processing technologies. In the post-production process, the answers are being separated into individual video clips. In the next step, a statistical algorithm gets trained to match answers to any questions users might pose to the virtual testimonies. So in the first training stage, the individual answer clips are linked back to the original questions from the interview. This data set of matches is fed into the statistical algorithm, providing the system with initial clues for question-answer matches. In various test phases, the algorithm is then trained using a range of open-ended questions, initially by the project team itself, and in later test phases, once the matches have achieved a certain level of accuracy, by user groups. And throughout the training phase, the matches are manually reviewed by the team. Ambiguous cases are discussed and marked as correct or incorrect. And in the case of incorrect matches, the questions are linked to other answers from the data pool, and the algorithm is updated with the data sets from the new links. The testimonies are available online in a browser version. That's the one I just showed you in the video. You can speak your questions into your computer microphone or use the chat option and type them in. But the testimonies are also displayed in several museums. And of course, there they also have a different effect or create a different atmosphere as they do here in the Zoom and in the browser version. And I also only include their display in museums in my research. And I will talk about this display more in a moment. As I mentioned at the beginning, I am not coming from an all history perspective, though I'm of course very interested in your thoughts on this format. I am exploring this transformation of witnessing from a cultural anthropological and praxeological perspective. So I'm particularly interested in what people are doing in the human-machine interactions, how are institutions envisioning and creating the interactions, and how are visitors or users experiencing them and making sense of them. So my leading research question is how interactions with AI-based virtual representations of Holocaust survivors are generating forms of virtual witnessing. How do interactions with virtual testimonies shape patterns of feeling, thinking, and engaging with experiences and perspectives of Holocaust witnesses? To what extent do these interactions continue established practices and narratives of remembrance? And how are new dimensions of remembrance unfolding in these interactions? What role do forms of algorithmic dialogue management play in establishing emotional connections and updating the meaning of history in the present? To answer these questions, I am looking at the development and production of the testimonies, as well as their presentation in exhibitions and their perception by visitors. My research is based on qualitative ethnographic methods of participant observation, including guided tours and interactions with the testimonies. It's also including exhibition analysis and ethnographic interviews with project staff as well as visitors. I collected data from November 2023 to February 2025 and conducted my research at the USC Shoah Foundation and in the Holocaust Museum in Los Angeles. as well as in Germany, in Frankfurt, in the exhibition Just Ask, which opened in September 2023 and presents 2 virtual testimonies. In order to analyze this transformation, and particularly to research the entanglement of its human and material or technical dimensions, approaching the interactions from the perspective of assemblage thinking is useful. Assemblages are wholes whose properties emerge from the interactions between parts. So through the perspective of assemblage thinking, we can consider witnesses, conversations with them, and the emotional practices embedded therein as elements in the assemblage of Holocaust remembrance. In this complex of elements, we can see how the different components and their relations to one another, so how the components interact or don't interact with each other, are both structured and structuring, generating the dynamics and meaning within the assemblage. This perspective includes the notion of distributive agency, which means that relations between elements are not only established by human subjects, but include the affordances and agency of non-human elements as well. In this way, I analyze the introduction of AI-based virtual testimonies into Holocaust remembrance, and I will now use the next minutes to dive into some transformations and emotional practices of remembrance, or in other words, the reassembling of relations. The data I collected aligns with the various studies that outline the virtual testimony's contradiction, moving between witnessing subject and technological object. As sociologist Johannes Barth summarizes, digital testimonies on the one hand reproduce the logic of the era of the witness, which conceives of the witness as a strong subject of knowledge. The digital witness is accordingly supposed to be addressed as such a subject. On the other hand, the addressability of the digital witness as subject must initially be rendered possible through the disassembly of the real-life witness testimony and its re-embodiment as a technical object. This touches upon the testimony's ambivalent corporeality. So now let's have a look at how this ambivalent corporality plays out in user interactions, and particularly how it's affecting the human connection, or to put it differently, the emotional dimensions of remembrance. In the interviews I conducted with visitors, many describe the interactions as special, wild, new, or, as I quote, something you've never felt before in your life. First interactions are usually accompanied by suspense and curiosity, with eyes fixed on the screens, displaying the virtual testimonies, eliciting smiles, chuckles, and fascinated ahs, ohs, and wows from visitors. But how exactly can we grasp this special experience visitors are describing? The production of a sense of co-presence allows visitors to recognize the witnesses as subjects and to feel, to some degree, that they have encountered a witness. As, for example, memory scholars Aleida Assmann and Jackie Feldman have stated about real-life encounters with witnesses, the physical presence of survivors is central for witnessing practices. I quote, "Effective witnessing is anchored in the visual and sensory contexts of significant remains and the body of the witness." One of the project's objectives is the creation of co-presence with the survivor. As an employee of the Dimensions in Testimony project says, you want to feel like you're in the room with a survivor, right? And then that naturally leads you down the road of, well, let's make them feel like they're there. By capturing survivors' bodies, voices, stories, and with that also expressions of feelings in the virtual representations, and enabling user interaction with the AI system, the project enables visitors embodied memory practices and as such central elements of witnessing. As a visitor in the Holocaust Museum in Los Angeles states, being able to have such an experience where not only are you able to hear, but you're directly asking these single questions. And I think it makes it so it's more impactful. That is more real. Students that visited the exhibition in Frankfurt in the German National Library also interacted with the 2 testimonies exhibited there, suggest the centrality of bodily experiences as well. I quote from an interview with a student, "I think for me, especially in combination with the exhibition, knowing what happened to them, seeing them in front of me and interacting with them, because you did get to see the people, even if they were on a screen. Yes, I can't think of any other word than real. Somehow it made it more real. The activation of central bodily and sensory experiences, seeing, hearing, talking, continue central emotional practices of witnessing. However, the special experience is also characterized by a somewhat aesthetic encounter with the latest technology and collaborations with an AI system. Even though most people approach the project with either no expectations or skepticism, these perspectives often turn into positive opinions about the employment of the technology in this context. On the one hand, visitors express their feelings of having a positive experience with future technology and at times even perceive themselves as witnesses to a milestone in technological development, as the following quote shows. These are the beginnings of interactive interviews, which is why I think it's amazing that we've been able to experience this here at the very beginning. Additionally, the expression of thankfulness and appreciation includes not only the witnesses who went through the extensive interview process, but is expanded to the project and technological possibilities. A student in an interview told me, "You don't realize how complex a project like this can be sometimes." And I think I really appreciated that. I think you have to be very grateful that you can still have this experience today. While visitors usually understand this experience in reference to face-to-face encounters with real living witnesses, the interactions are deeply entangled with experiencing technology. As the technology is designed to preserve the authentic original answers of witnesses, it takes into account that not all user inputs can be answered or answered correctly, and that interactions don't always go smoothly. My observations of groups in the Just Ask exhibition in Frankfurt show how visitors collaborate with the AI system to get the most appropriate question-answer match and thus the most immersive experience possible. If an answer didn't fit, they gave each other tips such as, "You have to ask a short question," or "You have to speak more clearly." In cases where interactions are moderated, staff members may also guide users in formulating questions. At times, visitors even receive instructions from the AI system itself when the virtual representations of the witnesses place so-called fallback responses, such as "Please speak slowly and clearly," which is sometimes even implemented immediately by the visitors. Such fallback responses can even support the illusion of co-presence and real-life conversation as they create the impression of spontaneity in human interaction. Such collaborations demonstrate the distribution of agency between human actors and non-human actors. In terms of assemblage thinking, human actors and AI-based testimonies not only share agency, but also constitute each other's agency to begin with. Unlike conventional forms of testimony, such as videos, users can search the pool of witnesses' answers through the conversation-like interactions and actively establish human connections themselves. However, in order to stabilize the human connection through conversational practices and enable users to take action and ask questions, the project developers also had to give the AI system some agency in the selection processes of responses as well. While this agency is partly experienced by users as a game or a challenge to trigger a matching response, it can also lead to frustration if the AI system repeatedly plays the same response or plays a non-matching response. Visitors may be disappointed that the immersion broke in the individual moments, but they interpret these technological fails positively regarding the overall experience, as a student states in an interview. "I was more relieved when I realized the AI doesn't get the question right now, to see that it doesn't work so well." So while the technological limitations mobilize ambivalent feelings, these fails are also valued by visitors and contribute to their experience. In this way, these collaborations function as emotional practices that generate trust, producing the authenticity of the testimonies, and through that stabilize a key component of Holocaust remembrance. The exhibitions, or in a broader sense, the institutions in which the testimonies are displayed, play a central role for the witnesses' co-presence and visitors' experiences as well. Incorporating the virtual representations into an exhibition or as part of a Holocaust museum provides the necessary background knowledge and emotional setting that contextualize the interactions. This includes, for example, the emotional affordances of the rooms with the testimonies. As you can see in this short video of the testimony in the Holocaust Museum in Los Angeles, they are displayed in darkened rooms that suggest a sense of intimacy. The comfortable seats create a cinema atmosphere. The bright screens are the focal point of the room. The witnesses sit in their armchairs, awaiting their audience, often even smiling or nodding, as a video clip of the resting pose is being played in a loop when the AI system is not activated by a user input. As one student recounts in an interview, so you know they're not there, but it's still something else. You get the feeling that there's something there listening to you, also that they're nodding all the time. Additionally, the exhibitions provide educational materials with suggested questions, supporting visitors to find their way into the interaction and identify suitable topics for questions. The questions not only help visitors to avoid technical errors, as they are most likely to produce a good question-answer match. They also guide visitors to meet the witnesses as subjects and therefore to perform appropriately and treat them with respect. The relevance of the public setting for such performances of memory becomes even more apparent if the interactions take place within groups, such as school classes, for example. I show again the image of the exhibition in Frankfurt, where the testimonies are displayed in a room that comfortably fits 20 to 25 people, and visitors need to step in the middle of the room in front of the microphone to ask their question to the testimonies. As my interviews show, many users experiencing stepping forward and speaking into the microphone as a moment of excitement or stage fright. On the one hand, they worry whether the technology will work and the AI system will play a suitable answer. But they also want to ask good and clever questions. One student said, "I didn't want to ask anything inappropriate, and somehow my head was afraid that I would ask something stupid or embarrassing. It doesn't really make sense that you go too deeply into a topic because you can't re-traumatize the person again. These are recorded questions, but somehow my head made a big deal out of it. And on the other hand, I didn't want to ask anything trivial." Even though visitors sometimes struggle to formulate concise questions that the AI system can grasp well, many visitors say it's easier finding content for questions to ask a virtual testimony, as they cannot hurt the witnesses' feelings or make them uncomfortable due to their actual absence. But the experience is not only shaped by the interaction with the witness and the technology. It is also shaped by the context of where, with, or in front of whom the interaction takes place. These renegotiations of good and appropriate questions point to transformations of commemorative performances. The technology inspires different questions or more freedom of asking questions, while the institutional setting, moderators, teachers, or simply other visitors are the stage and audience of asking questions. And the observations are regulating appropriate conduct and with that also appropriate emotions. In this way, such performances constitute and reproduce the authority and aura of the witnesses, while changed conversational practices also enable transformed emotional or human connections and thus continue the meaning-making of the past in the present. The technological design of the virtual testimonies does, however, also cause frictions, and with this last aspect, I will come towards the end of my talk. As the answers of the witnesses are recorded at a specific moment in time and do not get updated, the visitors and the AI-based testimony exist in different moments in time, so to speak. However, as demonstrated above, the interactions create a sense of co-presence with the survivors and thus also a sense of contemporality, where references to current events make sense. While the temporal misalignment is of course also imminent in the fails and collaborations I outlined before, the shared agency can become perceptible as emotional friction even if the AI system picked a matching answer to a user input, as the following observation shall illustrate. A group of school students, of whom several appeared to be Muslim, visited the Just Ask exhibition in mid-November 2023, during a time shortly after October 7th and the beginning of intense conflict between Israel and Gaza, which included attacks by the Israeli Air Force. A student asked the virtual testimony of Kurt Meyer, "Have you ever felt ashamed of being Jewish?" A few seconds passed before the answer was played by the AI system. "I've also had these thoughts. If I hadn't been born Jewish, then I wouldn't have suffered these persecutions. But I have, later I would say, more pride in being Jewish, especially after the founding of Israel, that strengthened my feeling as a Jew. I wasn't as strong earlier, but especially with the Army and the Air Force of Israel, I was very proud of it." By the end of the response, the atmosphere in the room had grown tense. Students shifted in their seats, briefly looking at each other before gazing down at their hands or the floor. The staff tried to read the faces of the participants. After a few seconds, the tension dissipated, and the group discussed who would ask the next question. As his interview for Dimensions in Testimony was taken before October 7th, Kurt Meyer doesn't address or even implicitly refer to the events of 2023. However, as the format and the matching between question and answer reinforce the sense of co-presence and contemporality, interpretations of the answers are expanded to understandings of current events by the audience. Here, the virtual testimony's hybridity of face-to-face interactions with witnesses and video testimony stands out, as media and Holocaust scholar Maria Zalewska states. The historical and lexical moment of one's contact with a survivor is replaced by one's contact with the past of the limited recording. Throughout my fieldwork, I found that while developers in museums are aware of the inherent temporal asynchronity of virtual testimonies and are transparent about it with audiences, no established practices yet exist for addressing these concrete situations. In this example, the staff was taken aback by the emotional friction and the guide took no further action. Over time, however, in similar situations, the staff seemed to adapt and would interrupt the interaction for reflections and discussions. And at this point, I'd like to mention that such emotional frictions don't occur in every group visit in the exhibition, so they are happening quite irregularly, and also they vary in intensity, and there was never any heavy debate, at least not on the tours I observed. These discussions stand out against the backdrop of Feldman's observations with witness talks on Israeli youth voyages to the Auschwitz Memorial. The assigning of supreme moral authority to the witness entails certain risks. Conflicts between guides and witnesses are almost always settled behind the scenes, and the witness is never contradicted or opposed in public. In her analysis of tertiary witnessing through video testimonies, Caroline Wake considers the ethical function of spatio-temporal distance. I quote, "To provide a space in which spectators can act out and hopefully work through any ethically ambiguous responses. This protects both the students and the primary witness. Students are able to voice inappropriate opinions without wounding the primary witness." This suggests that such reflections with visitor groups are facilitated by the witness's actual absence. Discussions and reflections are also encouraged by the staff, even without any frictions, and can include interpretations of survivors' answers, assumed opinions, and temporal confinements of the testimonies. But they also turn beyond the content into meta-reflections about witnesses' role in memory culture, what it means to remember one's own biography, and how it relates or doesn't relate to other events and experiences. Such renegotiations of the role of witnesses for Holocaust remembrance are also reflected in institutional perspectives, as an interview with an employee at the Holocaust Museum in Los Angeles shows. The survivors themselves are really only experts on what they went through, their one lived experience out of millions. So right, the Dimensions in Testimony is only one person's lived experience, can't talk to other survivor experiences or victim experiences in the Holocaust. And yes, survivors should not be expected to be authorities on world events. It's good that it's limited to what they know. Discussions about the role and answers of witnesses point to shifts in the power of interpretation and the reassembling of relations within the assemblage of Holocaust remembrance. Viewing the discussions from the perspective of emotional practices, we can understand them as mobilizations of responsibility in institutions and users for navigating the balance between respecting the experiences of Holocaust survivors while also contextualizing their opinions and perspectives. In this way, such conversational practices demonstrate how the field of Holocaust memory is tied with societal challenges, continuing to make the past meaningful in the present, even if the testimonies remain frozen in time. As my analysis shows, AI-based virtual testimonies preserve the human connection and thus emotional relevance of Holocaust memory. Though the project raises ethical questions and is characterized by tensions and contradictions, institutions and users are finding ways to adapt to the format. In these ways, the project generates socio-technical emotional practices that transform relations in the assemblage of Holocaust remembrance and generate forms of virtual witnessing. The activation of central bodily and sensory experiences, seeing, hearing, talking, continues central emotional practices of witnessing. Shared agency between users and the AI system facilitates collaborations, which function as emotional practices, generating trust in and authenticity of the testimonies. The institutional settings and audience of the interactions regulate appropriate conduct and reproduce the witness's aura and respect. Such group interactions are also the setting of renegotiations of good and appropriate questions and transform commemorative performances. The temporal limitations of the testimonies demonstrate a loss of central memory practices in witness talks, namely offering their perspective and understanding of current and future societal events. However, their absence and materialized memories can affect discussions and critical engagements with witnesses' perspectives and their responsibility to answer to such events. This mobilizes responsibility in other actors involved and prompts institutions, guides, teachers, as well as users and students to negotiate the role and meaning of testimony in the present. And with that, I'm done, and I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Berit. It was a really fascinating talk about, great technology, but also wonderful questions and an analysis of the emotional responses and the changes involved. And now we have a lot of time for questions and discussion. If people are interested, please, you can either raise your virtual or real hand, or you can post on the chat, or you can just address Berit directly. If there's no immediate question, I would start with my own. It was really striking to me. I mean, a lot of questions, but it was really striking to me this very last example, of course, you brought with the Muslim student in Germany, which I was immediately thinking about as somebody coming from oral history, where we know that giving testimonies is always connected to a public, to I speak with, right? So I might speak different to an Israeli group of soldiers than I do to a German. And I think that the other aspect that you mentioned is, the future, or the question of how contemporary questions are related to, as October 7 is really not only about the future, but it's also, we know that our understanding of history actually changes with contemporary events and transforms. So I was wondering, and the scene that you described just packs up. This is just so packed full of these kind of misunderstandings and problems this creates. I was really wondering about your thoughts, if you could tell us even a little bit more about your thoughts about how this might change emotional approach of visitors when these things seem to fall apart or seem to be a little bit standing in a different time in a way.
Well, I mean, off the top of my head, like I'm just gonna give my thoughts. I think what I get from the interviews or visitor responses in general, and this is including, I think there's a bit of a difference between the students' perspectives and the teachers' perspectives, for example, because they already have different approaches towards these testimonies. And in a way, I think what I get from them is that on the one hand, they are like thankful that they can still have somewhat of an experience of a witness talk, listening to a witness speak, and they are also sort of. I remember one conversation with a teacher that said, "Well, it's almost even kind of easier to talk about the Holocaust in the sense of we already." Kind of, and this circles back to the feeling aspect of it. Like we know how we are feeling about it, whereas with more current events like October 7th, we don't, like, the whole world is still figuring out of how to feel and deal with that. And so in a way, they're kind of these are two things that are in there. And then I again, like what I showed in the quote from the Holocaust, the employee at the Holocaust Museum in Los Angeles, and also it's also reflected in answers by the curator of the exhibition in Frankfurt, is that like the institutions are also like, is it survivors' responsibility to be the people who are giving us I don't know, guidance through to interpret these moments like October 7th, like is it their responsibility to do that? And of course they are welcome to share their perspective on it if they want to, I mean, also the institutions usually have very close relationships with the survivors. They know them very well. It's even friendships sometimes, and they say, like, some people don't even want to answer or say anything about these events. And so it's like you can really feel or get like this renegotiation of who is to speak about those things. And I think it's very ambivalent, because also what I also get from the interviews is that there is a sense of grief, that we don't have these people who will tell us, look at it from this perspective, or, you know, like, because it's sort of, I don't know, comforting. I don't know if that's the right word, but so it's a very mix of very different emotions. Yeah.
Speaking of emotions, I would be really curious to know how these people gave the testimony, which might be also a very strange experience.
With 1,000 questions for 5 days.
That is exhausting, but also I think the reason for giving the testimony is kind of it must be an interesting experience. But we have more questions already in the chat. I wonder if I would like to ask them directly. If not, I will read them, but you can also ask Esther, for example. If you want, you can ask, or otherwise I'll just read it. So Esther had a really good question.
I can read it. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
But maybe just for, I don't know if everyone reads, I'll just read it. How many testimonies by survivors are available in this way?
So as I know from the Shoah Foundation, they recorded about 60 of these interactive testimonies. There is, I believe, 5 or 6 available online on their website. And then there's, I think, about 12 in museums in the United States. And then there's the two testimonies in Germany in this museum, and I think one in Sweden, and I think one in Buenos Aires, actually. Yeah. So they have some of them available either in very localities or and 5 of them online, but they have more that are not accessible for the public yet.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah. So the next question is by Yuing Shan. I don't know if wants to ask the question. Otherwise, I'll also read it. Thanks for a great lecture, and is curious about the method. How exactly participant observation happens in this project?
Yeah. So participant observation is one of the basically standard methods of our cultural anthropology toolbox, you can say. So we basically call it participant observation because there's different stages. You usually start at the beginning, like when you get to know the actors in the field, like the institutions. You get to know them. You start like observing a little bit, just basically to get an idea of, okay, what's basically happening in this situation. And so then there's like somehow varying degrees of participation, and it really depends also on the field, like how much I don't know how much they want you to participate, if they prefer you to be more or stay more in an observant position. So in my case, this meant that, for example, with the guided tours or the interactions, I kind of was in the room with the school groups, for example, and I usually put myself somewhere in the background, and I basically just let the staff or the guides do the whole moderation. You could have imagined that I would have also done some of the guiding tours myself, but with this is actually really interesting because on the one hand, because at least in the German context, they already included a lot of reflecting questions to the audience themselves. So kind of my job as a researcher would have been to do the guided tours myself and to kind of interact with the group to also get a better understanding of what it means to guide people through these interactions. How does it feel for the guides? But they've done that basically already themselves. So I kind of stayed in a more observing stage, and I didn't like the participation part wasn't too strong in my research. And also with the Holocaust Museum in Los Angeles, like I showed you the small video with the small booth that basically fits only, I don't know, I think 4 people, 5 is already like really maximum. And I tried to be in the room when other visitors are also in this booth and to then kind of interact with them during their interaction. But I did it like 2 or 3 times, and it was every time like super awkward, and you were like kind of disturbing the people in how they would naturally interact with the testimony if a researcher isn't present. So I kind of also decided there to stay away from the interactions because it was changing too much of the interaction. And also in cultural anthropology, we try to grasp the phenomena as closely as to they occur as possible. I mean, of course, you're always changing a bit with your presence as a researcher, you're always changing a bit the interaction or the phenomenon, but you have to reflect about it. But this is basically what is meant about participant observation. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That was very, very interesting. I invite everyone to also just speak up or raise your hand to ask your own question instead of me having to read it, but I'm also happy to read, of course. The next question is by Maya Wilbarski, who asked about who prepared those 1,000 questions. If it was somehow connected also to your PhD work or collaboration, some kind of other project.
Yeah. So these 1,000 questions are usually prepared by the institution. So they have like a standard, how can I say, like not a prototype, what is the word for it? Like sorry, Ronnie?
Like a script.
A script, yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yes, they have some questions that they ask basically every time. It's like these questions about, I don't know, favorite food and whatsoever. But they, of course, also have to change the questions considering the biography and experiences of the survivors. So, and they have, I believe, done at the very beginning of the project was initiated in 2010. And there they did like testing rounds, also asking, for example, school students, like what kind of questions like to collect kind of questions they would have for a Holocaust survivor. So they did it a little bit. Also here, maybe you could call it participatory. And they, of course, I mean, they have a lot of experience in oral history as well. So they have a lot of a pool of experience of how to do such interviews. And they, in the preparation of the interviews, of the interview questions, they also, because in oral history, and I mean, you are more expert here than I am, but in oral history, usually it's also like more about letting the survivor speak, whereas for the dimensions in testimony, you have to sort of not to get like a 30-minute answer. So you have to sometimes break down the answers by single questions. So this is also something that they considered in the preparation of questions to kind of ask more detailed questions to get sort of very specific and framed answers, maybe you could say, that so the interactions feel smoothly in the end. So you have to kind of denaturalize the interview process a little bit to have a natural feel of conversation later in the interactions. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's fascinating. We have a lot of great questions. Also, I think one of them fitting to this the question, of course, about AI, and we all know that it produces, fake answers, and how they prevent to do so, or if they prevent.
Sorry, I didn't.
If the problem of having answers by AI, is there any? If I understood correctly, to my understanding, it was only using those very answers, right?
Yes, right. Yeah. So the project is very clear about, and I mean, I can talk a bit about now at the end of my project. I mean, generative AI has done a huge change even in the last year, probably. So they had very different imaginations about AI or the use of this technology when they started in 2010 than they have now. And they even mentioned it in I think in one of my interviews, one of the mentioned testimony employees told me, we didn't even have to think so much about fake and all of these things when we started this, but it became so much more strongly with the developments of artificial intelligence and the developments. And so nowadays, they on the one hand, they are like saying very clearly, like we will never put a word into the mouth of a survivor that he or she didn't say the way he or she wanted to say it. So they are being very careful with AI generated answers. There is some thoughts about I don't know, doing some sort of extra technology that they would have a different application outside of the virtual testimonies, sort of where you can, and it also probably wouldn't be like the representation of the whole body, maybe more like a chat interface or something like that. And so there's thoughts of how to implement generative AI. But it's, I think, and I think one really interesting question will be how, like, on the one hand, with further, I don't know, getting used to generative AI generally, on the one hand, and then when the last survivors have actually passed, like, I don't know if we think about in 10 years or 15 years, like how this is going to develop and how the red line is sort of going to move further and further away from it. But that's future talks.
Which is actually very nice to another question by Ivana, I think, about if you know how survivors themselves reacted when, interacting with their own AI reality.
I didn't observe any of this myself, so it's only stories I heard, and I know it from the two testimonies in Frankfurt, that they were curious about doing it, and I don't know, think they were a bit amused by it, you could say. So it wasn't, I don't know, it wasn't like, I don't know, I guess it was a bit awkward for them, but I can't answer too much about it because I I didn't talk to survivors myself, but yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a question about by Axel about how you, if you examined what historical insights and knowledge users were able to gain concretely from those interactions. And he's a bit critical, I think, about the how interactive it actually really feels, and you know how much you can gain as a teacher. He says,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. There is, I would say, like, and I did ask, I mean, I did the interviews with the students, for example, sometimes 1 week and sometimes something between 1 week and 5 weeks after they had the interaction or the visit to the museum. And in the interviews, I asked them sometimes, like, did you ask a question to the testimony, and what did you ask? And sometimes, like, even ask them, what do you remember about the stories that you heard? And usually what they say, like, they try to remember sometimes, and it's actually quite interesting, because I think what sticks really most is the experience. So it's not like, oh yeah, I mean, of course they remember fragments, like maybe, oh yeah, she had this doll that helped her through the time in the concentration camp or something. But it's generally like, I really think what they really take away from it is, I have seen it, I have heard them talk, I understood that this was a really difficult time for the survivors, and so I don't believe that, at least in the format that it's displayed in the museums, like, it's really creating more of an emotional experience that makes people or students understand the emotional relevance of why we remember the Holocaust. And I remember also an interview with a teacher. She said she would only use this format sort of as a starting point to, I don't know, when they do like 4 months or 6 months in school, and they talk about the Nazi period and the Holocaust, like when they take it from through the school classes. And she would only use this as a starting point to get people, I don't know, sort of interested or curious about the topic, because it's an emotional entrance into the understanding of history. But she said, like, and from there we can then dive into the historical knowledge aspects of it, like, what were the structures behind it? How did the Holocaust happen? Like, why did it happen? And so on, and take it down from there. So yeah, I'm and as for how interactive it really feels, I do suggest to try it out, because I really encounter a lot of skepticism towards the project, and it's really if you see them in the museums, and I mean, it's what I told you with the room and the darkness, and you have these really life-size screens, and of course it's a bit different if you have a whole group around you or if you are there alone, but it can feel quite interactive. Yeah, of course, never with the illusion that you really think that you are interacting with a person, but yeah.
But it's fascinating to hear about this immediacy that seems to create and real experience. That would be actually, I would that's a little bit. When you talked about skepticism, I thought it's probably mostly the skepticism towards technology, but I would also was curious about how, say, Holocaust denial, for example, might react like somebody who's really or students or who are not really convinced that it happened, and we see more and more moving together of fiction and reality in a way, how that might impact.
I mean, I haven't myself like heard it from students particularly, but I also think those kind of students probably wouldn't volunteer for an interview with me necessarily. So so I never encountered it in the tours or anything. I had one teacher interview who said that they have a lot of like problems maybe with that in the school class or in the school in general, about like Holocaust denial and so on. Yeah, like it doesn't really I didn't encounter it during the interactions, so I'm not sure how much I can actually speak to it. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. One question about your field research and if it's based mainly on the visitors as actors and their reactions to the exhibition, or also the survivors themselves in a way.
Yeah, it is mainly based on the visitors and their experiences. I did one interview with a survivor who did such an interview quite at the beginning of my research, but that was the only one. And I wanted to focus it on the visitors, or on the visitors, teachers, like the user perspective, kind of, because I felt that and to grasp this really emotional dimension that is in there, this is where I need to go. Yeah. Or this was what was interesting for me. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I think I've covered all the questions. If I forgot any, please tell me. Or if there's anyone wants to ask a last question, you're invited to do so. We still have Berit with us. But if not, I think we really heard a very fascinating talk. Thank you so much for all these insights and stimulating discussion, and for opening up these important questions about Holocaust memories and its today, and of course to the all of you who joined us tonight. And we hope to see you again also in one of the next events in the series. Ronnie, I don't know if you want to say a few last words.
Just wanted to say thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Berit, for a fascinating lecture and for moderating it. It was really, really great. I know the research, and the platform as well, but it's still always very interesting, and the questions were very engaging. So thank you both very much.
Thank you too. Yeah.
And of course, we're all praying for a rest of a quiet evening for our Israeli audience, and of course a quiet evening for all of us all over the world. And thank you so much.
Thank you too. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.